He was a soldier who once fought for a fascist regime, a man who believed in Mussolini's vision, until he saw what it truly meant. By the end of the war, that same man would stand between the Nazis and thousands of innocent lives, armed with nothing but forged papers, a stolen title, and a terrifying lie. He would save the very people his government once called enemies. His name was Giorgio Perlasca, a name that history almost forgot. In 1944, Budapest was a city under siege. German troops had taken control, rounding up the last of Hungary's Jews for deportation. Every day, trains left for Auschwitz, and every day, the streets grew emptier. Among the chaos, an Italian man walked the city in a worn coat, carrying himself like he belonged. He spoke politely to German officers. He dined with diplomats, but his smile hid a secret so dangerous that, if discovered, it would mean execution. Because Giorgio Perlasca wasn't a diplomat at all. He was a former soldier, stranded, hunted, and living under false papers. And the embassy he claimed to represent? Spain. The real Spanish consul had fled the city weeks earlier. Perlasca simply stepped in, and by the time anyone realized it, it was too late to question him. Using fake seals, quick wit, and sheer nerve, he began issuing thousands of protective documents, false Spanish citizenships that spared families from deportation. He bluffed Nazi commanders, manipulated officials, and turned diplomacy into deception, all to buy time, all to save lives. To the Gestapo, he was a calm, courteous bureaucrat. To the terrified families hiding in cellars, he was a miracle wearing a suit. And yet, no one truly knew who he was. Not even the people he saved. Because Giorgio Perlasca didn't just risk his life to help others. He risked his identity. This is the story of the man who pretended to be someone he wasn't, to remind the world what it means to be human. Before Giorgio Perlasca ever became a savior, he was a believer. Born in 1910 in northern Italy, he grew up in a nation swept by slogans, parades, and promises. Fascism, they said, would make Italy great again. And like many young men of his generation, he followed. He volunteered to fight for Mussolini during the Spanish Civil War, an ally of Franco, a proud soldier in the name of order and glory. He believed he was defending civilization itself. But war has a way of stripping illusions. In Spain, Perlasca saw the brutality behind the banners. Executions, fear, blind obedience. He began to wonder if he was on the wrong side of history. And when he was later sent as a diplomat to Hungary during World War II, that doubt had grown in a quiet rebellion. Then, everything changed. In 1943, Italy surrendered to the Allies, and suddenly, men like Perlasca were traitors in the eyes of Germany. Overnight, he went from soldier to fugitive. An Italian passport now marked him as an enemy. He was trapped in Budapest, a city falling deeper under Nazi control, cut off from home, with no nation to protect him. Every door closed. Every friend vanished. The Gestapo began rounding up Italians suspected of disloyalty. So Perlasca did what he'd later become famous for. He improvised. He claimed political asylum under Spain, the same country he had once fought for years earlier. And by some miracle, the Spanish embassy took him in. At first, it was just about survival. But inside those embassy walls, something changed. He saw refugees lined up outside, Hungarian Jews begging for papers, mothers clutching children, men with eyes hollow from fear. And maybe it was guilt, maybe it was conscience, but something inside Giorgio Perlasca broke open. He realized that the same ideology he had once supported was now killing innocent families in front of him. He couldn't undo the past, but he could choose what kind of man he would be next. And soon, he'd be given that chance, in the most dangerous way imaginable. By late 1944, Budapest was a city of ghosts. German troops occupied the streets. The Arrow Cross, Hungary's fascist militia, hunted Jews openly, dragging them from homes, schools, and hospitals. The Danube River ran red. Inside the Spanish embassy, the atmosphere was no less tense. Every day, desperate families gathered at the gates, begging for protection. The real Spanish consul, Angel Sans Breeze, had been issuing safe-conduct papers, saving hundreds by declaring them Spanish citizens. But as Soviet forces drew closer, Sans Breeze was ordered to evacuate. Before leaving, he pulled Perlasca aside. "Giorgio," he said quietly, "if I'm gone, someone needs to look after these people." Then he left. The embassy was suddenly empty. No diplomats, no authority, no orders. Only one man remained with the key. For a moment, Perlasca considered leaving too. He could disappear, save himself. But then he looked outside, at the faces pressed against the gates, waiting, hoping. And he made a decision that defied logic, fear, and survival. He became the Spanish ambassador. He forged new documents on embassy paper, copied official seals, and began signing his own name. Jorge Perlasca, charge d'affaires of Spain. The title was false. The courage behind it was not. He moved quickly, visiting other neutral embassies, Switzerland, Sweden, the Vatican, convincing them that Spain was still active in Hungary. He used their cooperation as a smokescreen, buying time to issue even more safe passes. Soon, hundreds of families were moved into buildings marked with Spanish flags, safe houses protected by diplomatic immunity. In reality, they were just ordinary apartments. But to the Germans, they were off-limits. When Nazi officers questioned his authority, Perlasca smiled calmly, offered coffee, and spoke as if he had the full backing of Madrid. His fluency in Spanish, his confidence, his bearing, all sold the illusion. He lied with elegance. He deceived with purpose. Every forged paper was a heartbeat. Every signature, a defiance. And as the deportations intensified, he worked faster, often sleeping only minutes between raids. In a city drowning in fear, one man's lie became a shield for thousands. But the longer he kept up the illusion, the more dangerous it became. Because sooner or later, someone was bound to notice that the Spanish ambassador didn't actually exist. Budapest was collapsing. The Arrow Cross patrolled the streets like predators, dragging men, women, and children to the edge of the Danube, executing them in the freezing night. Trains to Auschwitz still ran, even as the Red Army closed in. And in the middle of it all stood one man with a forged title and a terrifying secret. Giorgio Perlasca, Jorge Perlasca, Spanish diplomat, was now the only thing standing between thousands of Jews and certain death. It didn't take long before the Germans came asking questions. One morning, a black Mercedes pulled up outside the Spanish embassy. Two SS officers stepped out, demanding to speak with the ambassador. Perlasca adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and walked into the foyer like he owned the building. "Gentlemen," he said in perfect Spanish-accented German, "Spain is neutral." What seems to be the problem? They informed him that several of his so-called Spanish citizens were not, in fact, Spanish. They would be relocated immediately. Perlasca's face didn't change. He gestured toward a folder on his desk, filled with the forged papers he'd made himself. "These are official documents, sealed and signed by the government of Spain," he said coolly. "If you interfere with our citizens, it will be considered an act of aggression against a neutral nation." The room went silent. For a moment, one of the SS men smirked, as if he could smell the lie. But Perlasca leaned in, lowering his voice. "You understand, don't you?" he said. "If anything happens to them, Berlin will hear of it. And when they do, it won't be my head they'll want. It'll be yours." The bluff worked. The officers left. For that day, those families lived. But word began to spread across Budapest. The Spanish ambassador protects Jews. Each day, the lines outside the embassy grew longer. Families came clutching forged documents, children's hands trembling, begging for shelter. And Perlasca couldn't turn them away. He started expanding his network, creating safe houses, distributing food, bribing guards. Every move he made tightened the noose around his own neck. Once, Arrow Cross soldiers burst into one of his safe houses. They lined up the residents, ready to execute them on the spot. Perlasca arrived just in time. He stepped between the soldiers and their victims, shouting, "These people are under Spanish protection. Touch them, and you'll answer to Madrid." The soldiers hesitated, guns still raised. Then, slowly, they lowered them and left. It wasn't luck. It was theater, performed with the composure of a man who refused to show fear. That night, Perlasca wrote in his notebook, "If they ever discover I'm not who I say I am, I'll be shot before morning." But he didn't stop, because at that point, it wasn't about surviving. It was about saving everyone he could before time ran out. By January 1945, Budapest was dying. The Soviets had surrounded the city. The Germans refused to surrender. Civilians starved in basements while artillery shells shattered the skyline. Inside one of the Spanish safe houses, Giorgio Perlasca sat by candlelight, his forged documents spread across the table. The ink had barely dried on the latest batch of false passports. He could hear gunfire echoing outside, growing closer every night. His illusion, this fragile web of lies, was coming apart. Then came a knock. 3 Arrow Cross soldiers stood at the door, their boots dripping with mud and blood. Behind them, a crowd of terrified families clung to one another in the hallway. The leader pointed his rifle at Perlasca. "You, come with us." They took him to an Arrow Cross headquarters on the other side of the city, a decaying government building lit only by oil lamps. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, fear, and smoke. A Hungarian officer eyed him suspiciously. "You claim to represent Spain," he said, "but we have orders to remove the Jews from all safe houses. You will hand them over immediately." Perlasca's mind raced. He could feel his heart pounding, but his expression never wavered. He spoke with calm authority, channeling every ounce of the diplomat he was pretending to be. "Spain will not tolerate interference with its citizens," he said. "You will stop this at once." The officer laughed. "You think Madrid cares about a few Jews in Budapest? You're alone here." For the first time, Perlasca stepped closer, lowering his voice, his words sharp as knives. "Maybe, but the war is ending. The Russians are days away. When they arrive, they will ask who protected neutral diplomats and who murdered them. And when they hang men like you, I'll be the one they ask to identify the bodies." Silence. For a long, unbearable moment, the officer stared at him. Then, with a wave of his hand, he said, "Get this man out of my sight." Perlasca walked out, his pulse racing, his lie intact. He didn't go home. Instead, he went straight to another safe house, warning families to stay quiet and hidden. Night after night, he moved from one building to another, bribing guards, confronting fascists, negotiating with German commanders, bluffing with the authority of a government that didn't even know he existed. One night, he found a group of Arrow Cross soldiers rounding up children from one of his protected houses. Perlasca shouted until his voice broke, insisting the children were Spanish citizens. When that failed, he threw himself between the soldiers and the children, daring them to shoot him. They didn't. Something in his eyes, fury, conviction, insanity, made them hesitate. By dawn, the soldiers were gone. The children were alive. That was the last night Perlasca ever slept. For weeks, as the siege dragged on, he continued his impossible charade, saving anyone he could, one forged signature at a time. And then, one cold morning in February 1945, the gunfire stopped. The Red Army had taken Budapest. The Nazis were gone. The Arrow Cross had vanished. The city was a ruin of ash and silence. When survivors emerged from the safe houses, they found him standing in the street, coat torn, face pale, eyes hollow. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, as if to say it's over. When the war finally ended, silence fell over Budapest like dust. The Soviets marched in. The Germans were gone. The shooting stopped. And yet, for Giorgio Perlasca, the noise never really faded. He had seen too much. Faces in the dark, hands reaching through barbed wire, the eyes of children he couldn't save. But now his work was done. He packed what little he had, left the empty embassy, and began the long journey home. No grand send-off, no recognition, no medals, just the quiet footsteps of a man who had risked everything and survived. When he returned to Italy, no one knew his story. To his neighbors, he was just another middle-aged man rebuilding a life in the ruins of Europe. He found work, married, raised a family. He went to church on Sundays, smiled at shopkeepers, paid his bills on time. And for nearly 40 years, he never said a word about what he'd done. The safe houses faded. The forged passports were lost. Even the survivors, the people he'd saved, didn't know the name of the man who had stood between them and death. He became a ghost, a man history forgot. Then, in the late 1980s, a woman knocked on his door. She was from Hungary, one of the children he had saved. She had spent years searching, following a trail of rumors, old embassy records, and faded signatures. When she found him, she could barely speak. "You're him," she whispered. "You're the one who saved us." Word spread quickly. Survivors came forward, dozens, then hundreds, each with their own story of Giorgio Perlasca, the mysterious Spanish diplomat who had appeared like a miracle during the Holocaust. But now the truth came out. He hadn't been a diplomat. He hadn't even been Spanish. He was just an ordinary man, a former soldier, a disillusioned fascist, a human being who decided that doing nothing was no longer an option. When reporters asked him why he did it, his answer was simple. "When I saw people being persecuted, I could not stand by. I had to act, because if we all say nothing, then who are we?" In 1989, Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust memorial, recognized Giorgio Perlasca as righteous among the nations, a title reserved for non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. He joined the ranks of Oskar Schindler, Raoul Wallenberg, and other heroes whose courage defied the machinery of genocide. Historians later estimated that he saved over 5,000 lives. 5,000 people who lived to have families, children, and futures, all because one man refused to look away. When asked if he considered himself a hero, he shook his head. "No," he said softly. "I did what I had to do. Anyone would have done the same." But the truth is, very few did. Giorgio Perlasca passed away in 1992, quietly, at home in Italy. No grand funeral, no military honors, just a handful of family and friends, and the memory of a man who once saved a city with nothing more than his courage and a lie. In the years since, his story has spread across the world. A story not about war or politics, but about the simple power of choice. Because sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with guns or armies, but with truth, conviction, and the refusal to stay silent when silence becomes complicity. Giorgio Perlasca proved that even in humanity's darkest hour, light can come from the most unexpected places. And maybe that's what heroism really is. Not glory, not power, just a man who looked at evil and said no.